One of the biggest challenges in landscape photography is knowing when you should multi-process a single raw file in order to deal with motion in the scene versus when you should truly blend different exposures together. It's a challenge I run into frequently, so in this segment of the course, we're going to process this juniper tree both ways to compare and contrast the advantages of the different approaches. Using image 6502 as our base, we can see that we have a properly exposed raw file. Now it does have some slightly clipped highlights, and you might argue it's overexposed by 1/3 or 2/3 of a stop, and I wouldn't disagree with you, but for my purposes, it has plenty of detail. As we bring down the exposure slider, I think the sky recovers quite nicely. Conversely, if we bring up the exposure slider, when we get to 3 stops, there's plenty of detail, and that's safe for the limits of my camera. Your camera may be slightly different, but certainly this scene for me is okay from this single raw file. But take a look at what happens when we bring down this exposure by about 2 stops. We are certainly clipping some highlight channel detail, versus if we look at the next exposure, there's just much better detail in that part of the image. It's a relatively small part of the image, so whether or not you care depends on your own personal needs and how large you're going to print this, but there is a difference between them, and there's some benefit obviously to this darker exposure. Conversely, if we take this image, the base image that is, and kick it up by 2 stops to compare it directly with this brighter exposure, hitting C to compare them side by side, and zooming in, there's going to be less noise. The image on the right here shows greater detail and less noise than our base image, so certainly that's an advantage of the brighter exposure. But also as we zoom around it, notice things like this tree branch here, which is moving, so we cannot blend these two directly together. We wouldn't have good alignment, but beyond that, I just like the look of 6502 better in this part of the image because I'd rather have a crisp, sharp tree than one that's a little bit blurry from movement in the sky. So there's no right or wrong answer here. We could blend all 3 exposures, or we could multi-process the base image 6502, and in the next several videos, we'll do both.